green handout that my paper is only titled Digital Orality, and that's because at the time of putting my submission in, I had just recovered from pneumonia at the end of November and was catching up on the rest of my coursework and didn't quite give it too much thought. But as I get started now, my paper is Digital Orality, Desire, Authority, and Truth in the Age of Hyperreal Speech. You probably wake up in the morning and check your phone, greeted by a breaking news notification. You tap a social media app and a face fills the screen. A speaker looks at you directly saying, "You need to hear this." Their tone is urgent and emotionally charged. As you scroll, thousands of comments affirm, debate, oppose, or express solidarity. Within seconds, you find yourself in an event where you're more than just passively receiving information. The interface subtly convinces you of a direct encounter, that the speaker is speaking to you personally rather than an anonymous crowd. Speech has become image-rich, archived, and constantly affirmed or contested in real time. Reactions happen before understanding, and reacting becomes part of how we interpret. The importance of an event is defined by the visible collection of responses, comments, reposts, and reactions that collectively show what the moment is meant to signify. Since the internet mediates speech through literate technical systems, it can be viewed as a form of secondary orality. I argue that the internet retrieves the most from primary orality techniques, far more than any previous medium. Digital media intensifies oral participation and frees it from the constraints that once defined secondary orality. I describe this communicative condition as digital hyperorality. Digital media and the medium of the internet create continuous participatory speech events that are mediated within image-saturated virtual environments. In these environments, presence is simulated by the medium and memory is externalized within persistent yet unembedded digital archives. These media restructure attention and alter truth, authority, and belonging. While digital media can distort truth, I am interested in how it redirects the pathways through which truth becomes compelling. Insofar as what people believe matters, there is also the question of how their environments influence their ability to recognize something as believable. Without rehashing too much of orality and literacy, as we know, in primary oral cultures, speech is seen as an event rather than an object. Knowledge is situational and memory is shared within the community. Authority is held through the speaker's presence. Speech requires people to be together, as authority relies on the listener's openness and ties the speaker and listener through a shared sense of risk and responsibility. On the other hand, literacy brings abstraction and permanence. Written words separate speech from immediate presence, as arguments can be refined, revised, and organized long after they are first thought of. Unlike primary orality, which naturally emerges in cultures without writing, secondary orality relies on literacy for its existence, but reintroduces elements of primary orality through its techno-electronic presentation. Radio and television, within there, speech feels immediate and participatory, and audiences are able to engage in communal attention and response across time and distance. However, a radio listener can feel addressed, but cannot respond in real time. When I was a kid growing up, it felt like a really big deal if two cartoons had a crossover episode. Surely, every kid everywhere was watching this. This is an event to participate in and talk about with the other ones when we get to school the next day. Digital platforms eliminate this barrier, allowing reception and response to happen within a single environment. Instead of mediating speech through curated literate systems, hyperorality emerges in decentralized post-literate networks where speech is continuously performed, evaluated, and recirculated through algorithmic systems of visibility. What is distinctive is the return of oral dynamics through their fusion with visual media and quantified participation within the lasting digital archive. Authority derives less from embodied office or long-term communal recognition and more from the effective emotional impact of content within the network. Pierre Bourdieu's notion of habitus helps explain why it is also post-literate, as meaning on the internet is increasingly formed through patterns of perception, action, and expectation developed via repeated embodied interaction rather than through text alone. In this way, the habitual user comes to read and navigate virtual environments through acquired dispositions, signaling a shift from literacy to fluency grounded in participation and experience. The dynamics of digital hyperorality can be interpreted through Marshall McLuhan's media tetrad, or 4 laws of media, where each medium enhances certain abilities and makes others obsolete, retrieves earlier forms, and eventually reverses them into new states when pushed to extremes. Digital networks enhance immediacy and participation of speech as voices spread quickly and blur the line between speaker and listener. They obsolesce print culture's gatekeeping and structured arguments as vetted texts compete with instant engagement validated speech. They retrieve primary oral traits of expressive communication focused on presence. And at the extreme, it reverses the rawness of immediacy in speech to a performance for a widespread audience as dialogue is shaped by recognition through metrics. From these, 3 features of digital hyperorality are clear: presence without co-presence, participation without accountability, and permanence without stability. First, presence without co-presence. Live streams and short-form videos simulate intimacy as the speaker looks into the camera and addresses you. Viewers experience many psychological cues of interpersonal interaction, such as eye contact, tone, and facial expression, without the mutual vulnerability that normally accompanies them. The relationship seems personal but is structurally one-sided because there is no shared physical risk and no spontaneous reciprocity. Second, participation without accountability. Digital platforms blur the traditional boundary between producers and audience, since anyone can speak and anyone can respond, but participation is controlled by the metrics of views, likes, comments, shares, and the platform policies of the technocratic elite. Third is permanence without stability. Digital speech is archived, searchable, and endlessly recompiled, making meaning unstable when fragments detach from their original contexts. Clips circulate separate from full arguments, and memes gather a layer of communal reinterpretation. Digital hyperorality thus relies less on literacy and restores the immediacy of speech while loosening it from the embodied and communal constraints that once shaped it. To understand the importance of this change, we need to think about attention. Attention shows desire because what we focus on reveals what we care about. So attention is as moral as it is psychological. Just as memory can become disconnected from its original context, attention chooses which parts of reality stay salient and which ones fade away. Jacquel's analysis of technique helps clarify this tendency. He argued that technological systems tend to become self-augmenting and self-referential, and once established, these systems seek optimization, reorienting human practices to sustain themselves based on their own internal logic of efficiency. Digital platforms exhibit similar dynamics, as platform architectures reward content that captures and retains attention, creating feedback loops that favor emotional intensity over logical argument. What feels compelling is often perceived as true. What resonates seems authoritative and trustworthy, regardless of whether it promotes truth or wisdom. The architecture of attention becomes self-reinforcing as participation adjusts to the system's internal logic. Insights from Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation and Guy Debord's Society of Spectacle further shed light on this environment, as a simulacrum is a representation that either no longer refers to an original or has replaced the original entirely. Simulation is the process by which these representations create a world that seems real. Baudrillard argues that late modern culture is driven by signs that circulate without referencing any prior reality. And these virtual worlds function similarly by creating environments where images feel more tangible and convincing and authoritative than those in the physical world they imitate. In hyper-real conditions, representation does not mirror reality. It redefines what is real as the simulation overtakes it. The image becomes an event and its visibility a mode of existence. Debord's concept of spectacle describes a world in which social relations are mediated by images and representations. People don't watch images, they live in a system where attention wields social power. Digital hyperorality amplifies the spectacle as communication shifts from mutual exchange towards continuous performance for a networked gaze. Retrieving immediacy and participation while loosening embodied constraints, digital media intensifies desire and offers symbolic forms of satisfaction. In this way, digital orality engages with what Baudrillard calls hyperreality. We see this in online influencer culture, wherein individuals enact a curated character to convince their audience of something. While someone may seem rich and successful, the reality is that the sports car they drive and the home they shoot their videos in are nothing more than a rental and a studio. Nevertheless, their speech becomes performative, validated, and experienced by a broad, diffuse audience. This shift reveals a theological dimension. Human beings are more than information processors, but they are creatures driven by desire. As Charles Taylor argues, identity develops within moral imagination. It is shaped by shared horizons of meaning in which we seek recognition and belonging. Social desire is the longing to be seen, acknowledged, and participate in a narrative greater than ourselves. And these horizons act as an interpretive framework that influence what we find meaningful, trustworthy, and worth our devotion. Like our reaction to a viral story, it often comes before rational evaluation. We are drawn to what promises fulfillment. Desires are often rooted in external standards of worth drawn from history, tradition, and community, and digital hyperorality intensifies this longing by overriding external standards and providing instant visibility and potential for communal affirmation. It enables ongoing self-narration and identity building through the participation, as recognition is measured in likes and shares that reinforce the pursuit of visibility and self-worth. Youth live stream culture offers a great example. Outside of my studies, I serve as a youth pastor, and one time I mentioned a simple fact to my group. One student turned and asked, "Chat, is this real?" referring to a live stream chat. This prompted me to explore the field of media ecology further. As my students deeply involved in this live stream culture, they are imagining an audience went offline. His reference to chat implied a broad tribunal, a collective authority that reality must align with. Even without the screen, the self behaves as if observed, performing within the accepted boundaries of speech and thought. Digital participation is internalized as a way of perceiving. The imagined audience influences how reality is judged, especially among teenagers where the desire to seem cool can overshadow the pursuit of sincerity and truth. Digital hyperorality causes an internalized, coexisting actor-spectator identity that shifts attention, since the main source of meaning is no longer just those physically present, but the network gaze. Truth becomes what persists and is valued within that community's imagined perspective. The self lives and manages itself before the judgment of an ambient audience, an invisible crowd whose reactions grant legitimacy. Historically, religious life was lived coram Deo, before the face of God, and within accountable communities. Digital culture trains us to live coram publico, before the face of a shifting, self-conscious public. The new ultimate audience is fleeting yet persistent and always critical. And online media ecosystems, by design, favor brief, manipulable experiences that train attention towards constant stimulation, rapid judgment, and the affirmation of pre-existing preferences. These habits inhibit the depth of engagement needed to encounter what Jean-Luc Marion calls saturated phenomena. Saturated phenomena are experiences of excess that exceed our capacity to understand and control within consciousness, as our minds cannot set clear boundaries around them or fully grasp them. Revelation naturally accomplishes this, making experiences of prayer, holiness, and the sacraments saturated phenomena as well, because of the otherness they represent and the wonder they produce, which draws human beings into the experience. Since the hyperorality of virtual worlds extends beyond the medium of technological interaction, human and device, they are also saturated phenomena. They contain an element of unknowability because of their disparate construction over time, as it is difficult to trace a particular experience or worldview, as they are formed in a communally defined mythology whose origins and meanings can evoke wonder, ethical reflection, and change in perception. The problem is that online media exposes to countless images, events, and messages, but saturated phenomena are about encounters, not exposure. Human beings are exposed to hyperreal images without seeing anything meaningful. The shift to online image-driven media fosters haptic devotion through self-directed viewing and visualization of the collective's online imagination. But encounters with saturated phenomena require patience, receptivity, vulnerability, and openness. These qualities are undermined by the ability to curate content, scroll past discomfort, and avoid what lies beyond our control. The challenge is therefore not just relativism, but redirected desire. If visibility becomes the primary currency of recognition, deeper mutual forms of knowing become harder to sustain. This is not to say that digital spaces and virtual worlds are entirely negative. As we saw during the COVID pandemic, they offer complementary opportunities for evangelism, discipleship, and pastoral presence. However, electronic media can replace genuine encounters by substituting with representations of communities and even representations of theological truth for the actual realities they aim to express. The incarnation of Jesus Christ reveals that divine self-revelation is fundamentally embodied and by extension cannot be entirely reduced to digital forms or avatar interactions, as they are limited in fulfilling spiritual longing and symbolic transcendence. Historically, ecclesial authority has depended on ordination, tradition, communal discernment, and theological training. Influence moved through clear structures, seminaries, denominational publications, local pastors, and established leadership. In digital hyperorality, influence emerges through visibility and emotional clarity, which has caused a crisis of authority and authenticity in today's Christian landscape, raising important questions about where the church gets its authority in this decentralized age. A short viral clip can have more impact than a long sermon. The figure who communicates with immediacy and emotional clarity and simple storytelling appears more trustworthy than the teacher whose authority is based on careful study and accountable relationships. The congregant might hear dozens of online theological voices before a Sunday sermon, and the interpretive horizon of a local congregation struggles with an ecosystem of digital teachers, commentators, and influencers who operate outside the accountability networks that have historically grounded ecclesial authority. Communities hear the voice without sharing the life from which that voice comes. Additionally, ecclesial traditions have shaped expressions of desire through embodied practices like liturgy, sacraments, silence, catechesis, and confession. These practices require patience and vulnerability as they gradually change perception and guide attention toward higher realities that cannot be quickly understood. Liturgy redirects attention to confession, thanksgiving, and hope. Sacramental participation places believers within a tangible community and the story of God's work among his people. And silence interrupts the possibility of ongoing self-narration and definement of one's own selfhood. The ability to curate one's informational environment can protect individuals from experiences that traditionally foster spiritual maturity, as a person who remains within carefully maintained circles of self-affirmation. The question is not whether digital participation is real, but rather what kind of soul it cultivates. Digital hyperorality shows that words go beyond their informational purpose and become formative events. However, without bodily constraints, participation can generate intensity without leading to transformation. Emotional experiences may multiply, while slower forms of spiritual growth stay underdeveloped. The result can be a space full of expression that is lacking in endurance. Hyper-digital culture amplifies this longing for communion. By retrieving participatory immediacy while loosening embodied constraint, digital media heighten desire and offer symbolic, shallow substitutes. What looks like a crisis of truth is also a crisis of formation. Beyond misinformation, people are being shaped by environments that reward recognition more readily than transformation. The church need not respond with panic or nostalgia, but it must discern how its practices of proclamation, sacrament, and community can cultivate healthy desire more deeply than the surrounding architectures of attention. Rather than competing with digital media for speed and visibility, ecclesial communities may need to recover the slower rhythms that have historically sustained Christian formation. In an age of hyperreal speech, theology is not only called to defend propositions, but to consider how words once again become flesh, how being addressed should go beyond the satisfaction of self, but to transformation. When speech is bound to shared practices of repentance, worship, and mutual care, words can once again form persons rather than performative caricatures circulating the network. I'm 1 minute ahead. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. Questions?
Thank you very much.